for what's in the package.
Yeah, right.
But if you take a blueberry or a raspberry, you're stealing from the next person.
He's right, 100%. Okay.
Yeah, you could wash them.
You could puree them in a smoothie.
You could take your immersion blender right there and, just starts making a smoothie.
You could take your hose out and, soak them in.
You have to use the
Soap
soap water wash. Yeah. Okay. All right, Chevra. Nice to be back. I'm sorry for the time off. Let's continue in this Sefer Ohale Yaakov from the Harav Cohen. Hakona chayfetz min hagazlan. If you purchase items from a person who's stolen them, Misha Kanach, I think this is what we were up to. I think, is that where we're up to, Barry? Yeah, okay. Barry's our gatekeeper. Okay. Misha kana chayfetz ganuvo gozil lifnei yir shaba'olim. A person purchases a stolen item. And well, how do you know it's stolen? Well, you buy it off the back of a truck, right? So, and it's before the owner has given up hope of ever retrieving it. Imhu ganav ogazlan she'eno meforsam v'lo yada shahadavar shekanav ganuv v'chlei. He says, let's say it's not known, you didn't realize that when you bought it, that it was stolen, because this is not a known robber. You just figured, I saw a guy at the subway station and he was selling watches. I figured,
This is good.
yeah, so yeah, why not?
This side or this side?
So even though there's a halacha that when you have a stolen item in your possession and the owner has not given up hope of retrieval, you have to return it to the owner. Yesh al haba'olim lahachzir lakona esma shalokach laganavo lagazlan. So let's say you are able, for whatever circumstance, you're able to identify who the original owner of this item is. In other words, the guy sells you a wallet and then you see that it's got someone's name on it. So you say, you know what? I better do the right thing. I better return this to the owner. Chazal made a special takana. They made a special accommodation for a person who's going to return stolen items, that if he paid for it, you have to pay him back. A common case would be, let's say you see a guy on a street corner in New York selling tefillin, okay, and he's not one of our people. He's an African American dude, and he's selling tefillin, okay. And so you say, well, listen, I have a mitzvah to try and retrieve this item and return it to its owner, because it's got the guy's name on the tefillin. So in Hebrew letters. So you say, you know what? I'm going to buy it from him, give him the $20 that he's asking for. I'll Jew him down to $20. And Elon Gold, he's a comedian. See, he says, I don't take that as an insult. I take that as a compliment. We are known as masters of negotiation. Yeah. So he says, so I'm gonna negotiate the guy down to, and I'll buy the tefillin. So there's a halacha that Chazal made that when you find the owner of the tefillin, he has a chiyuv to pay you the $20 because of what you expended. Va'afilu im hukar haganav achar kach ein halokeach chayav lamud bedinim haganav. And let's say you're able to identify the ganav. The buyer has no obligation whatsoever to try to get the money back that he spent. And the reason why Chazal made this accommodation, they did it as a way of incentivizing people who discover stolen property to get it back to the owner. She'im lo yachziru lakonim ashishilin laganav lagazlan yimneu anoshim lischor beliknot zeh mizeh. He says, and furthermore, not only is it an incentive for a person to get the stolen item back, but Chazal were worried that it could destroy the economy if people knew that if whenever they're dealing in stolen goods, they would lose their money. Because then that's going to cause people to stop buying and selling on the marketplace out of a fear that maybe someone's going to discover that, hey, this was a stolen item. And then the rightful owner will be able to confiscate the item without paying for it. And then the guy who bought it will be out of pocket. Or if he knows that, well, okay, we'll let you get your money back, but you have to take the ganav to court. And he says, he's going to say, well, I don't want to deal with this. So Chazal were actually cognizant of making sure that no halacha should have an adverse effect on commerce, on commercial trade. And because so little was regulated in the times of Chazal as far as being able to recognize how something came to the marketplace, in ancient times and even in medieval times, you'd go to the town center for the marketplace day, and people would set up booths. You had no idea where they got these items from, whether they were stolen or not. And if there's going to be a concern, well, if you buy something and it turns out to have been stolen, you're going to have it confiscated without any rights to compensation. People would refrain from buying things. And Chazal felt that would be injurious to the overall economy and would impoverish the community. So therefore they said, you can assume that everything that you purchase is not stolen property. And if it's discovered later to be stolen property, you are still entitled to either keep the item, or if the owner says, I want the item back, he has to pay you for it, exactly what you paid.
I'm not sure in Canadian law, I've had situations where I know people who bought stuff and it was hot. Normal, buying through the normal channels, and it was stolen. The police took the goods away from them, and they had no recourse, the people who bought the goods.
Right. So
Buyer beware or something?
well, normally there's buyer beware, especially with real estate.
Caveat emptor.
Caveat emptor, exactly, except in real estate, if there's a latent defect the seller knows about, right?
Yes.
There's that, or patent defect, buyer beware, because they can see it, right? So, but in goods, they have this bona fide purchaser for value without notice. So if you buy stuff for value, good, proper value, not $30 for, $1,000 stereo or something. So you're bona fide, you're honest, you don't, for value, without notice of, claim of the real owner. They did the same thing in the market to preserve the marketplace. They said, you can have it, you buy a good title, and that's it. And the real owner has no recourse against this bona fide purchaser for value. You have to go after the thief, right?
So it's only if you bought it like at 20 cents on the dollar and you had.
Yeah, if you had some constructive notice, or you should have known that this isn't kosher kind of thing, then you're in trouble, and the seller, the owner is not, right? Claim against.
So what would be an example under secular law? What would be an example of where you had notice that this was stolen? Like Moshe saying he bought it
So
20 cents on the
my
dollar.
customer bought these ski goggles, and they were 20 cents on the dollar out of nowhere, and it's like.
Out of the back of a truck.
But how unusual, is that? There's a lot of closeouts like that.
It was from a regular, it's not about so much about the price, it's about who you're buying it from in my business. And the guy was a legit regular guy who he didn't know he had gotten it stolen.
Yeah.
Listen, I can get a deal 20 cents on the dollar sometimes, or 30 cents on the dollar. Why not? That's
Sure.
but see ya.
So examples would be actual knowledge. Let's say the guy says, look, these are just, these are hot, like great deal, whatever. So you're told that it's, it's questionable source of where they got it from. Or it's just implied from the circumstances, they're selling,
Guy opens his coat and
guy opens
sells
his
watches.
coat, he's got all these things and he goes, like, don't let anybody see, so that you're on notice, there's something fishy going on here, so there's that. Also the price, if you're buying something that's, like a stereo, for $10, that seems a little, inconsistent that you're paying good value for, you're paying like the minimal value for something because he stole it, right?
Well, like you can go to a pawn shop sometimes and buy a Rolex for half price because it's used and someone needed the cash. But that
It's
doesn't,
different. Someone's desperate, they sell stuff for
Right.
And it's a pawn shop.
no, but a lot of times pawn shops won't ask questions, if it's an unscrupulous pawn shop, the guy.
So there's, so you ask some questions, how to get or whatever, but pawn shops kind of have like this presumption that, like, that they're not stolen, that they'll lose their license or whatever, but, that maybe like they were saying, somebody, it's an estate sale or someone was desperate and they needed to get some cash, so they sold their wedding ring for $2 or, like whatever, right? Like, so that would be, you wouldn't be put on notice, I don't think, we bought cheap at a pawn shop.
But the one difference we would say in halacha from what secular law says is that the original owner does have a legal right to reclaim his item in halacha. He just has to pay the buyer for it, right? Because we do say that it really is his. It's really his. Okay. All right, let's go on. Misha kana chayfetz miganav mefursam. Avolo yada shahachayfetz ganuv. Ein bo takana sashuk. B'tzarech hakana lahachzir leba'olim. So he says, if you, however, buy an item from a known ganav, so the guy is known, like the circumstances, off the back of a truck, from he opens up his coat, right? There is no remedy where the Chazal give you in that case, even though you don't know for certain it's stolen. There's a presumption of it being stolen. Ve'ein haba'olim nostim l'lokeach klum. In that case, if you see a guy wearing your old Rolex in shul, and you say, "Hey, let me see your new watch. You just bought that? That looks really cool." He takes it off, shows you. It's got an inscription from your wife to you, was your wedding watch. So in that situation, you say to the guy, "Where'd you buy this?" He said, "Well, there was a guy at the TTC who was opening up his coat and selling watches." He said, "That's my watch. Didn't you realize that was stolen? Didn't you suspect?" He said, "Yeah, but he was offering such a ridiculous price. I figured I might as well buy it." So in that situation, you can take the watch back for yourself, and you're not mechuyev to give the guy the $20 that he paid for it. And so the buyer can say to you, "Well, wait a minute, I paid good money for this watch. You can't just take it." You say, "Yes, I can. You should have realized it was stolen. And if you want to get your money back, go back to the TTC where the guy was selling watches and have him arrested, and you'll deal with him yourself." Okay. All right, let us go on. Bless you. Parachovo b'chefetz shagaza. If a person pays back his debt with stolen goods, im haganav parachovo b'chefetz haganuv, ein bo takanas hashuk. So everything that we've set up until now, as far as takanas hashuk, where Chazal wanted to preserve economic trade, is only true where you bought something that was stolen unbeknownst to you. There's no chiyuv for you to relinquish the item unless you get paid for it. But let's say a ganav pays me back a debt. Guy owes me $100, and he pays me back with a watch that was stolen. And then my friend sees that I'm wearing his watch. There's no takanas hashuk, because that wasn't done in the course of commercial trade of buying and selling. It was done in the payment of a debt. But rather, the owner can seize his watch or whatever was stolen without paying the guy who took the watch as debt payment, and then the debt gets revived. And kamoad ata, because since there was already a pre-existing debt and the guy paid it illegitimately, you just revert back to the debt. And whatever, you believe the ganav because you lent him the money, you'll have to get the money from him again. That's all. Okay. Next, ganav she mashkan hageneva. If the ganav gives over stolen goods as collateral. Ganav she mashkan hageneva bein she mashkan yeter al dameha o bepachod midameha va'asu bo haba'olim takanes hashuk nosnim lebal hamashkon ma'osav v'chozim v'osim dinim haganav elim kein hayaganav meforsa. So in that case, where he offers the stolen item as collateral, then in that kind of situation, they do create takanas hashuk. And I'm not sure why this would be different from the payment of a debt, but apparently because it's almost like a sale. You look at a loan with collateral as almost like a sale, because the guy's only willing to lend money if he takes an item of value in exchange for it. So there they do takanas hashuk. So if I lend a guy $100 and I take a watch that turns out to be my friend's watch because it was stolen, so then my friend can take back his watch, but he has to pay me for it in that situation. And then and then I have to go back to the guy who gave me the watch, on that basis I lent him the money, and he's going to have to I'll have to figure out how to get that money from him now that it's an unsecured loan. Unless
But the guy didn't know.
yeah. So nosdim lebala mashkon ma'osav. So there the guy who took the mashkon is entitled to get compensated by the person who owned the watch. There he is entitled to get compensated. So he's covered. And the guy whose watch was stolen will have to figure out how to go after the ganav. Now that's all true unless it was a known ganav. Again, with a known ganav, we don't make takanas hashuk. Now, tainas hitzalti la'atzmi. Now, what if a guy makes a claim, I was saving myself? Now, what does that mean? Misha kana mehaganav b'kinyan sudar. V'nasan mos avor hachefetz. A guy makes a kinyan with a ganav. In other words, they shake hands, they make a kinyan. I'm going to buy those goggles from you, okay? And I pay you for them. I haven't taken possession of the goggles yet. I'm awaiting delivery. The kadam haba'olim v'hotziu mehaganav. And then the real owner of the goggles, gets a SWAT team to raid the warehouse where the goggles were being stored, and he gets them to seize all the goggles. So those goggles are mine. I mean, they belong to him, the guy who got the raid on the warehouse, but I already paid for them. So Einot Tzarich. All right, so we'll look at Moshe's case. Moshe bought these goggles innocently, unaware that they were stolen goggles. He paid the guy 20 cents on the dollar because he figured they were closeouts, right? So what's the big deal? All of a sudden, he reads in the paper that the warehouse where the goggles were stored was raided, and they were returned back to the original owner because it turns out they were stolen. Eino tzarich lahachzir es hamaos lelokeach kevin sheyachol liton hitzalti la'atzmi. So the owner of the goggles, let's say Wayne was the owner of the goggles, and he was able to retrieve his goggles, he can say to Moshe, who paid for the goggles, I don't have to pay you for those goggles because I was just saving myself, meaning I would have taken a huge loss because someone stole those goggles from me. Ella im kain, unless kibel halokeach es hachefetz v'tafsu haba'olim miyad halokeach. Unless, so the only time where we make this remedy of takanas hashuk is only after the buyer, Moshe, takes delivery of the item. That's where we make this accommodation for him, that when Wayne wants to get his goggles back, he has to pay Moshe. Azai bala chayfetz
So
eno.
even if Moish paid already,
And
he
you'll
didn't
have-
take delivery, but he paid.
Yeah, even though he paid already,
What's
since
the
he,
difference?
the difference is that the owner, Wayne, is taking the goggles not from you, Moish. It's like he's not taking them from you, so now you're totally, he's taking them from you
But doesn't he
directly.
take possession once
Once
he
I
pays,
pay.
even though they're in
No.
the other warehouse?
No, yes, he does, technically, but from a halachic standpoint, but not as far as when it comes to stolen goods. Yeah. Azai balachefetz enu niftar milasham lakoach lalokech asadomim sheshilim mipnei takanas hashuk. So it's only when the buyer Moish has taken delivery of the stolen goods that he's entitled to get compensated by the owner, by Wayne. Okay, but if he hasn't yet taken compensation, let's see what the footnote says, if there's any explanation for this. No, he just provides us with the reference. It could be because the Takanas Hashuk was only when you've already taken possession of it. There's like a negative feeling that or a compounded negative feeling that when you have to relinquish the watch that you bought and you're wearing on your hand. There, Chazal came in and said, we've got to fix this. But if it's a case where the guy hasn't yet taken delivery of it, and the owner, the real owner, Wayne, can say, listen, I found my items in this guy's warehouse. What was I supposed to do? Just leave it there because of a claim that it was already paid for by someone else? That I'm not obligated to do. And I'm also not obligated to pay someone who never yet took delivery of them. Okay. Next, chiyuv hashavas haveda al yedei kona. What about the obligation of hashavas haveda when you discover that something that you bought is stolen? Kishiyesh takanas hashuk. B'makom shiyesh takanas hashuk. So where a buyer is entitled to compensation from the real owner, when he's purchases a stolen item, afal pisha kana biyoker. Ein chayev halokeach lachzir hachefetz laba'olim, ella ad sheyishalim lo habalim kol ma shenasan laganav. He's still not obligated to relinquish the stolen item until he gets compensated by the owner. He can say, listen, I know this is a valuable item. It's a Rolex watch, but I bought it from a pawn shop thinking that I was getting a good deal. But you still have to pay me. And furthermore, the guy who bought it from the pawn shop thinking that it was okay can't start now finagling with the guy and say,
But you can't make a profit on it?
he can't make a profit on it. He's only entitled to get back what he paid for the stolen item. Right? So once he discovers it's stolen, that goes beyond takanas hashuk. That's like rewarding a guy for buying something that was stolen, so that he's not allowed to make a profit on it.
Even though he didn't even know.
Even though he didn't know, he thought he was going to make a profit. So in your head,
Yeah,
you bought these goggles thinking I'm going to make a killing on them, right? Sorry, wah, right? It's not going. It doesn't go. Yeah. So. Okay, now lahatzil nafsho b'mamon chavera. Now let's get into other issues of Geneva, having to do with saving your life with someone else's property. Afilu im ha'adam nimtza b'matzav shel sakanas nefashos, aser lo lignov o ligzol kedei lahatzil etz nafsho b'mamon chavera. He says, even if your life is in danger, and the only way to protect yourself is by stealing someone else's property, let's say to act as a shield or something, right? And you know that you're stealing someone's property in order to fend off your attacker or whatever. Ela im kein daito l'shalim achar kachas mashanotel b'gneva b'gzela kidi lahatzilas asmi mavis azai mutar b'ofen hazeh ve'eno b'gerer yaharig val yavar. Unless you have in mind that you're going to pay him back. In other words, you're running away from the mob or whoever's running after you. And the only way for you to protect yourself is for you to steal some shopkeeper's umbrella because you're Jackie Chan and you're gonna fight him off with an umbrella or whatever. I've been watching too many movies. Okay. And you say to yourself, well, I'm gonna have to pay for this umbrella. You're not mechuyev to pay for the umbrella right then, because the guys, by the time you pay for it, you'll be dead. Right. So you're allowed to steal the umbrella, but then you have to pay the shopkeeper back for the umbrella. You can't just say, well, I'm exempt because I have to save my life, right? But the chiddush is it's not Yaharg Val Yavor, which means there are certain prohibitions that even if your life is in danger, you're not allowed to commit that prohibition. But Geneva is not one of those things, right? So you're allowed to steal in order to save your life, but you still have an obligation.
I don't think that's the first thing on your mind when someone's chasing you to pay back the sword. You're gonna run into a house and you see it, whatever, gun there. You really think that's gonna be the first thing? And we're sick on a budget, you can do anything. I don't,
Well, anything with except the three cardinal sins.
right, so that this is not one of the three cardinal sins.
That's exactly the point. And that's the reason. I mean, that's all. Yeah, it may seem obvious. But let's see. But you have to have in mind to pay it back. Okay. Next. Lihitrachek midavar shechezkaso gazul. To distance yourself from things where there's a presumption of it being stolen. Kol davar shechezkaso ganuvo gazul. O shaharov ganuv. He says anything where there's a presumption, or at least a strong suspicion that the item may be stolen. Kagon shekana eitzel hamochsim shelo kedin. Let's say you purchase something from mochsim is usually tax people. A moches is a tax collector. But let me just see.
The CRA comes to your.
Let's see. Is a tax collector. I'm not sure. Maybe there could be a corrupt person who's selling you items. O shahalistim chazaka shaba mamona migazel. Or let's say it's a known thief. Asur liknos mehem olehanos. You're not allowed to buy from them or to get any benefit. V'chein ein liknos mipolim o umnim davar sheish lachshosh shemachu shalomi das balabayas. Furthermore, you can't purchase something from a worker if you suspect that they did not ask permission from the owner to sell the item. Kigon liknos min haroim semer o chalav o gediyim. The classic example that's offered by the Gemara is, let's say you know there's a guy who's hired as a shepherd to graze sheep, but he's not hired to make a side business, a side hustle off of these sheep. He's hired to watch them. And then all of a sudden he comes over to you and says, want to buy some goat milk, right? So, or you want to buy a baby lamb? The owner won't know, because, it didn't know that the sheep was pregnant, right? So, but if there's a small flock and he's selling several kids, several small goats, mutter liknos mimenu arba o chamisha me'eder gazul kevin shemispar hagidiyim muat ubavadai bal hatzon yargish o yignov kevin shechesrono nikar. He says, I really don't understand what he's saying here. If there's a small flock and the guy is selling a number of sheep, you'd be allowed to purchase a small number because that would be detectable. I don't see why that would be. Oh, he says, Klalo shel davar, the rule is, imabolim yargishu b'geneva mutar liknos mehem v'imlav aser liknos. He says like this: if the guy is selling in such a way where it'll be obvious to the owner that those livestock are missing, then you can assume that he has permission from the owner to sell. because he wouldn't sell something that would be so noticeable that, by the end of the day, he comes back and there's like 5 goats missing, okay? Conversely, if let's say the guy tells you, here, hide this, whatever I sold you, hide it. Don't show it to people. Then you know that it's stolen. You can't buy from someone who speaks to you in that way. Okay. All right, we'll hold it here for today, and then we'll get to some specific examples tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. And say some Shalom Wayne.
Let's see what.